Welcome class. This is session number 10 and we're going to talk about types of sewing machines and its features. Before we start with this class, what I would also like to add is that you as fashion managers or as fashion merchandisers, your understanding of sewing machines, even a fair understanding of sewing machines would sometime or the other come handy. And this could be one of the reasons why you will be able to have an extra edge over the others. And when I say over the others, I'm talking about students from the other business schools. Pantaloons today is run by Aditya Birla, and the team includes professionals from NIFT as well as IIMs. Now, in this particular scenario, the understanding of fashion is going to be far better in case of FMS students, and it's going to be a little less for IIM students. Having said that, it wouldn't take much time for the students from other B schools to catch up and stand equally with you. So spending more time on these technical things is only going to help you create that edge over any other fashions, any other business school student, at least in the area of fashion. I'm going to slide number 2, the content. We are going to talk about sewing machine components. Number 1, types of sewing machines. Number 2, number 3 is different bed types, and third is automatic workstations. So first we talk about sewing machine components. You have seen the sewing machines at home also if you have, and otherwise there are you would have seen these sewing machines in the institute. Now the reason why I shared the videos with you is because we are locked down and we do not have access to these labs. Therefore, looking at these machines and understanding them, touching it with your hand and get a feel of it. And therefore, I had shared those videos. And I hope that you have already gone through those videos. Most of them are very small, about 1, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. So we're going to talk about sewing machine components, and we are going to talk about the sewing machine components of, for the case that we have taken is that of a single needle lock stitch. We have not taken the cases of overlocks and other machines. So most of you are going to see this single needle lock stitch machine, and if you have an understanding of the sewing machine components of single needle lock stitch, you pretty much would be able to figure out for other types of machines. Now we go to slide number 4, which shows the picture of sewing machine, lock stitch machine, along with the nomenclature with the arrows. And if you can see, there is we'll start with the easiest one, which is a spool pin. Spool pin is on the top of the machine, and on which it's a pin on which you put those reels of threads, from where the reel can supply the thread to the rest of the machine. So the spool pin, spool thread is the stitching thread that we use to stitch garments. And then there is a bobbin winder. Bobbin winder is a small jutting out projection on which you can put the bobbin, and you can actually wind the bobbin using the machine. So once you put the bobbin on the bobbin winder and you start the machine, the bobbin winder starts rotating. So if you take one loose end of the stitching thread and wind it on the bobbin and then put it on the bobbin winder and start the machine, the bobbin winder is going to start rotating and it's going to pull the thread from the spool pin and it is going to wind itself. Once it is wound fully, then this bobbin can be put into the bobbin case, and then you can start with the stitching. So we've talked about spool pin, then there is this bobbin winder and the spool thread, and then we have the thread take up on the top. Thread take up is one metallic component which is slender and which is slightly rounded at one end, and it has a hole at the end, and it carries the thread through it. A thread take-up is simply a device which supplies the thread to the needle when the needle has gone down, pierce the fabric, and it is about to make the one stitch with the bobbin thread. And once the needle comes out, the thread take-up device pulls the thread, secures the stitch, and then the process continues. Then, of course, you have stitch width regulator, stitch length regulator. There are two knobs that you can see. Stitch length regulator is a knob in which you have the different numbers written on it. Normally, in a single lead lock stitch Juki machine that we have at NIFT, the numbers given is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can change the knob, and according to that, the length of the stitch is going to increase or decrease. So depending on the type of fabric or the type of stitch that you are making, you can make the changes to the stitch length. And stitch width regulator, if you want to do a zigzag kind of a thing, then you can increase the width of the stitch. When we are going in a straight line, the width of the stitch is 0. If we want to do a zigzag, then the stitch width is going to be, let's say, 1 mm or 2 mm, depending on what you have set in the machine. And then you have the balance wheel. Balance wheel is a wheel which in this figure you can see from the side. This balance wheel is on the extreme right side of the machine on the top, towards the top corner. Now, this balance wheel is the wheel which you can turn with your hand also. And if you are operating the machine through electricity, then when the machine is running, the needle is going up and down, then you'll see that the balance wheel is also rotating. A balance wheel is, if you want to do a couple of stitches with your own hand, you can use that. And also, just in case while you were stitching and you have ended the one operation and the needle is inside the fabric, then you can turn the balance wheel slightly so that the needle comes out. Once the needle comes out, you can remove the fabric, then you can go on for the next operation. Then there is a stitch selection panel also, which is the largest knob, round knob, which you can see on the machine. And this is in case, and just to the left of the knob, you will see different shapes of stitches. Now, this is in case of normally these single needle lock stitch machines that we have in the industry, they don't have this feature. Such features are normally seen in those stitching machines which are made for domestic purposes, what we have at home. So these models by Usha or Singer, they tend to have this feature. And there are, let's say, you can see 8 divisions in this knob, the stitch selection panel, and there are 8 options of stitch. You can choose the stitch type, and accordingly, when you do the stitching, the needle is going to move accordingly to give you that particular type of a design. That's the job of stitch selection panel. And then there is a thread guide. Thread guide is from the stitching thread reel. From that reel, it goes through various thread guide, and then it reaches the needle. And then you do the stitching. Now, these thread guides are, the purpose of these thread guides is to ensure smooth supply of stitching thread to the needle. And then there is presser foot lifter, presser foot, needle, feed dog. Needle is something that you know. Needle is that one particular component which actually carries the thread from the top part, and it pierces the fabric, and then makes a stitch with the bobbin thread. And then there are other components also, which we are going to see in the subsequent slides. So I'm going to slide number 5. This is again schematic diagram of stitching machine. and which has various components which have been mentioned with the arrows. So we'll take them one by one. This slide number 5. We are going to slide number 6. So when we go to slide number 6, you can see a stitching machine. This is a stitching machine by Singer, a black machine made of wrought iron, and this has been used since ages. And this is the most simple stitching machine which can be used using a foot pedal without electricity. And again, you can see various components being identified with the help of arrows. And in this particular slide, slide number 6, we are going to discuss the arm and the hand wheel. Arm is the bigger part that you see. This entire portion which is visible on the top is called the arm. The entire mechanism, it houses the drive shafts. So all the shafts are inside this particular arm. And stitching activity happens because of all these components which are inside this arm, which is not visible to the naked eye. If you open this machine, then you will be able to see what is there inside and how does it work. That's the arm, which is the purpose of the arm is it acts as a housing for all the components so that the components don't get dirty. And then you have the hand wheel, or which is mentioned as balance wheel in this slide number 6. Hand wheel, it controls the motion of the machine manually or electrically. So if you want to, with the hands can turn this balance wheel, or if it is connected with the pedal at the bottom, when you are sitting, the machine is mounted on a table, and then you sit on the chair, and there's a pedal at the bottom, and with your foot you can press the pedal. With the help of that also, you can turn the balance wheel. And in case of electric stitching machines, the pedal is just a device which you press, and then the balance wheel rotates. And whenever the balance wheel rotates, the stitch starts happening, as in the needle starts going up and down. That was what we had in slide number 6. We go to slide number 7. Again, the same picture of the stitching machine. In this case, the simplest that we had discussed was the spool pin. It is a pin on which you mount the thread. It's called thread spindle or a thread stand. That was slide number 7. Now we have slide number 8, in which you can very clearly see the thread spindle or the stand. It holds the spool of thread. So that was slide number 8. We go to slide number 9. 9 is very interesting. You can see the machine. From the machine, the top of the machine, there's a metal pipe kind of thing jutting out, and there's a small additional component which is attached to it. And you can see there's a spool pin from which the thread is coming, and that spool pin is the thread is coming to this pretensioner. Pretensioner is what has been encircled with the yellow dots. In this pretensioner, the thread comes, it goes through the hole, the vertical pipe on which there is a disc attached to it. Just below that disc is a hole. So this stitching thread first goes through the hole, comes out of it towards you, and then it goes through those two discs. So those two discs, between that disc, that thread will go, and then it will go to the guide. Guide is on the left side, the flat metal plate, steel color with two holes on it. That is one of the thread guide. So the thread is going through the pretensioner, the two discs, and then it is going through the guide. Now this thread retainer or the pretensioner, if it is a pair of discs, the tension disc that you see, a separate picture in the inset, the tension disc has two discs, and then you have a spring which you can see, and then there is a nut bolt. So if you tighten the screws or nuts, then there'll be lesser space between the disc, and the tension between the disc is going to be higher. So that means if you increase the tension, the thread will not be easily supplied to the needle. So, and if you reduce the tension by way of unscrewing it, then the thread will be very free to flow, and freely flowing thread is not good for stitching. So there should be an optimum amount of tension in the thread. Now, as a thumb rule, if you have thin stitching thread and you're working on very thin fabrics, then the amount of tension that you require is very less. But in case you are working with thick stitching thread and you have thick fabric like denims, then in that case, the stitching thread tension, the tension should be higher. In that case, you are going to screw it a little more so that there is more pressure between these two discs. And while the stitch is being made, the tension is higher. The threads are tighter, and therefore you will get great stitches, even. We are also going to talk about the thread guides, which are the thread eyelets. They smooth the thread and protect it from abrasion. So from the stitching thread reel to the needle, the thread will go through various thread guides in such a way that there is no abrasion, the thread does not break, and with the correct amount of tension, smoothly the thread is supplied to the needle. That was slide number 9. We go to slide number 10. And slide number 10, we're going to talk about thread take-up lever. Thread take-up lever is the metal component, slender and linear in nature, which is slightly bent at the, okay, so thread take-up lever is not very nicely visible over there, thread take-up lever. But if you have seen the various components of the stitching machine, that is video number 2, and then the threading of the machine, which is video number 3. If you've seen that, thread take-up lever is a simple mechanism by way of which thread is being supplied to the needle when the needle is piercing the fabric, and then the thread is pulled a little back when the needle is coming back to complete the stitch. That's the job of thread take-up lever. That was slide number 10. We have come to slide number 11. In slide number 11, you will see pressor bar and needle bar. The picture is amply clear. If you see, the pressor bar is a bar, a pipe kind of a component, which holds the pressor foot. Pressor foot is that device which actually pushes the fabric to the floor of the machine, stitching machine. So pressor bar, the bar to which the pressor foot is attached. We are going to discuss the pressor foot in detail. And the needle bar is that bar which holds the needle. So there is a pressor foot and there is a needle. So you have to remember pressor foot and needle right now. What we're seeing over here is the pressor bar, and we are also seeing the needle bar. You can, of course, you can see the needle, and you can also see the pressor foot. The pressor bar is the bar to which the pressor foot is attached, and needle bar is the bar which holds the needle and takes it up and down during the stitching process. So that brings us to the end of slide number 11. We go to slide number 12. In slide number 12, we see the pressure regulator. Now this pressure regulator, it is the control that regulates the amount of pressure on the pressor foot. Now this pressor foot is the device which presses the fabric to the floor of the machine. So with how much pressure should the fabric be pressed? As a thumb rule, the flimsy fabrics should be pressed with not so much of pressure, and the thicker fabrics, they should always be pressed with higher amount of pressure. Now, when you are increasing or decreasing the pressure, you can actually do the operation and then see whether the pressure which is being exerted is correct or not. It should not be very less, it should not be very high. So that's the pressure regulator. It's just the yellow encircled pressure regulating thumb screw. And the screw, if you tighten it, then the pressure is going to increase. And otherwise, if you loosen it, the pressure is going to decrease. That brings us to the end of session, slide number 12. We go to slide number 13. In this, you can see multiple things. But what we are actually showing you over here in this slide is the needle hole, the stitch hole. stitched hole is marked with the yellow arrow. There's a small hole, and the needle goes through this hole and pierces the fabric. It's a very thin hole, only enough to allow the passage of needle freely. The needle hole is never, the diameter of the needle hole is never much higher than the diameter of the needle. Now the hole in the throat plate, so the entire metallic plate that you see at the bottom, on which we keep the fabric for stitching, that particular metallic object is called throat plate. And that throat plate is the part in which you can see the hole. So throat plate is what carries the needle hole. The hole in the throat plate, the needle carries the thread into the hole so that it can interlock with the bobbin thread. And then you have the feed dogs. Now the feed dogs is what has been marked with the orange lines, 2 lines. Now, on both the sides of the needle hole, you will see on the left and the right of the needle hole, you will see serrated edges, tooth-shaped, linear metallic components, which are marked with the orange line. That is called a feed dog. Feed dog, feeder, or feed. It is the toothed mechanism beneath the presser foot that moves the fabric forward and backward. So the feed dog, the job of the feed dog is to carry the fabric in the forward direction. So once the needle pierces the fabric, goes down, makes the stitch, comes up. The moment the needle comes up, this feed dog lifts the fabric up and moves towards the forward direction. And then the feed dog goes down. Now the fabric has proceeded ahead, and now the needle is going to start with the new stitch. So that is the feed dog. That brings us to the conclusion of session, slide 13. We go to slide 14, where we can see the presser foot much better from the side and from the diagonal direction. This is a presser foot which you have seen ample number of times. Now, if you see the photograph on the right side, you can see the presser foot, and then you can see the throat plate. So the throat plate, there is a space that you can see between the presser foot and the throat plate. This is the space where you are going to insert the fabric, and then you are going to let the presser foot come down, and then the stitching can start. So the role of the presser foot is to hold the fabric in place for stitching. So from the top, the presser foot presses it downwards, and the throat plate is what holds the fabric from the bottom. And then the stitching can happen. That was slide 14. We go to slide 15. Slide 15 is the easiest slide that we can come across. The most familiar slide, it shows the needle, and it is a hand needle. Hand needle that we have seen at home for all the domestic purposes. This hand needle has the eye hole, the needle's eye is in the opposite direction of the needle's sharp end. So hand needles have the sharp end and the eye on the opposite sides. But if you go to slide number 16, you will see that the needle that we use in the industrial machines, in that case, the tip of the needle and the eye of the needle both are at the same end. And you can see the various parts of the needle. Needle itself is a very huge subject in apparel manufacturing, and needle is something which would have significant amount of time given to it in BF Tech. And the job of the needle is to penetrate the fabric. It takes the fabric to the hook or shuttle and up again to make the stitch. That's the job of the needle. We go to slide number 17. slide number 17, there are two things that we are showing over here: reverse stitch control and the stitch length regulator. Stitch length regulator is what we have discussed in the beginning itself. The regulator, with the help of the regulator, you can change the SPI, which is stitch per inch. So more the stitch per inch, lesser is the length of the stitch. More the stitch per inch, higher would be the length of the stitch. A reverse stitch control is an interesting thing which has been shown through the red dotted line. We were on slide number 17. We were talking about reverse stitch control. What essentially this particular feature does is that, let's say you have to make a stitch of, let's say, 3 centimeter. So you start the stitching process, you complete the stitching till the 3rd centimeter, you complete the stitch. But ideally speaking, and as a matter of practice, and for the purpose of securing the end, what we do is that we have stitched and then we want to come back at least 3 or 4 stitches back. So whenever you want to complete the stitch and then come back by 3 or 4 or 5 steps, you press the button or you press the pedal, you do the stitching, and then you bring it to the end. And when you want to come back, you have to press this reverse sewing button. When you press it, and then you press the pedal at the bottom, the entire mechanism will start moving in the opposite direction, and you will see that the needle is going up and down, but the fabric is coming back to you, and the reverse stitches are being made. That is the purpose of the reverse stitch control. That's the end of slide 17. 18, we are looking at the throat plate, the red encircled dotted line. This entire portion that you see, that is the throat plate. In that throat plate, you will have the needle hole also, and then you can see that toothed component. The toothed component is what goes through the grooves which have been made in the throat plate, which we'll see in the next slide. Now, the throat plate, it protects the lower part from building excess lint, meaning to say, when this entire stitching is happening, a lot of these small fibers are coming out, and these fibers, they are going to get accumulated. Now this throat plate is there so that these small fibers don't enter inside the machine at the bottom, and then ultimately would lead to some kind of a breakdown. So that's the job of a throat plate. That's slide number 18. We go to slide number 19, and in 19 you can see the top view of the throat plate. So in the top view, you can see the arrows in the right photograph. You can see those 2 arrows. Those 2 arrows that you see, they are pointing towards a small hole. The small hole is the needle hole. And the grooves that you see, the empty spaces, those are the spaces through which the toothed feed dog, they move from up and down. And in the left photograph, you can see the throat plate slightly lifted at an angle. And then below the throat plate, you can see 2 series of those tooth. Now those tooth that you see, those are the feed dog, which is able to come out of these grooves in the throat plate and is able to move the fabric in the forward direction. Now that is a throat plate, slide number 19. And we go to slide number 20, which brings us to types of sewing machines. Right? Before we go ahead, a suggestion to you is you can watch all those videos that have been sent to you, and you can go through it at least 3 or 4 times to have a good hang of the components of the sewing machine, which should come handy sometime later in your life when you're working in organizations. It could be a retail brand, it could be pure marketing, or it could be just pure content development and things like that. May have nothing to do with machines, but at the end of the day, you as fashion students, you should definitely know those machines and how are the garments created, how are